Her daughter's phone rang 6 times and went to voicemail. Her son-in-law's rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Her neighbor B, who had a key to her house and who had said specifically, standing in the kitchen just last Easter, "Marvella, you call me any time, day or night. I mean it." Let it ring 7 times and did not answer. The temperature outside was 19 degrees. Marvella Coates was 73 years old, and she had been on the floor of her kitchen in Culver, Pennsylvania since 6:47 that morning, when her hip had gone out from under her on the wet tile near the sink, and the world had come up to meet her with a sound she would not describe to anyone later. That had been 2 hours and 22 minutes ago. The clock on the microwave was the only thing she could see from where she lay that told her the time, and she had been watching it with the focused attention of a woman who understood that paying attention was something she could do when she could do very little else. She called her oldest daughter in Harrisburg. Voicemail. She called her youngest daughter in Altoona. 4 rings. Voicemail. She called her pastor. Voicemail. She called the woman from her Tuesday card group. 3 rings. Picked up. A pause. The sound of the woman's television in the background. Then, voicemail. She had heard her think about it and decide. She called her son, who lived 40 minutes away. His phone rang once and went to voicemail, and she understood from the speed of it that he had sent her there. That was 9 people who had her number saved under a name they had chosen, who had at some point said some version of the thing people say. "Call me if you need anything. Call me any time." And who, on a Wednesday morning in January, when the temperature outside was 19 degrees and she was on the floor of her kitchen and she could not get up, had let her call go. She lay on the cold tile for a moment and looked at the ceiling and did the thing she had been doing her whole life when things went wrong, which was take a breath and then decide what to do next. She scrolled to a number she had saved 8 months ago for a reason she could not entirely explain, under a name she had typed in because she had learned his name in a parking lot and had thought, for no reason she could have defended at the time, "I should keep this." The number had a name above it. Gravel. She pressed call. He picked up on the first ring. What happened in the next 4 hours would tell Marvella Coates something she had suspected for a long time, but had not, until that morning, known for certain, that the people who say they will come and the people who actually come are not always the same people. And sometimes the ones who come are the last ones you would have thought to call. Culver sat in Cambria County in the western part of Pennsylvania, the kind of place the mountains had arranged around a valley and then proceeded to mostly ignore. It had been a coal town once, substantially, and for a long time, and that history was the kind that leaves its shape on a place even after the industry has gone, in the way the streets were laid, in the steepness of the yards, in the particular quality of the silence that settled over the town on winter mornings when the cold came down off the ridges and the smoke from the chimneys went straight up into a white sky. It was a town that took care of its own, had been, for most of its history, the kind of place where people showed up for funerals and casseroles and the particular emergencies that small communities have always shown up for, because the alternative was a certain kind of loneliness that everyone in the valley understood and nobody wanted to be responsible for creating. But the town was different from what it had been, in ways that accumulated without announcing themselves. People were busier, or felt busier. The busyness and the actual busy had merged into something indistinguishable, and in that indistinguishable space, certain calls went unanswered. The Crowbar sat on the edge of Route 22, 2 miles east of the Culver Township line, occupying a building that had been a hardware store, and before that a feed supply, and before that something no one currently living could name. It smelled of sawdust and beer in a combination that should not have worked, but did. The bar ran the length of the left wall, 6 stools, 4 of them with the original vinyl. A jukebox in the corner that played country and classic rock on a rotation nobody had updated since 2014, and nobody had complained about since. It was not a place for strangers. It was the particular kind of bar that has been the same bar for 30 years, where the regulars know which stool is whose, and new faces are noted without ceremony and assessed without hostility, and eventually, if they prove themselves worth assessing, absorbed. Gravel McKenzie had been sitting at the far end of the bar since 10 that morning, which was not his habit, but which was permitted on the grounds that it was not his usual day, and he was not his usual self. He was 52 years old, and he had the build of a man who had spent the first 20 years of his adult life in trades that required weight to move, and the last 15 carrying that weight, without anywhere particular to set it down. His vest was Keystone Chapter, Hell's Angels, Eastern Pennsylvania, worn in the way a man wears something he put on so long ago it has become less clothing and more like a second skeleton, structural and unseen. He had a coffee in front of him and a beer he had not touched, and the expression of a man who had come somewhere quiet to think about something loud. He had been riding since 5 that morning from Altoona, where his brother Denny had spent the night in the hospital after a cardiac event that turned out to be less serious than the word cardiac made it sound, but serious enough that Gravel had been at the bedside by 6 and had not left until the doctor had used the words stable and home tomorrow and take it easy in the same sentence. He had ridden the 50 miles back in the cold with the particular compressed feeling of a man who has been afraid for someone and has been given permission to stop being afraid and has not yet figured out what to do with his hands. He wanted quiet. He wanted something ordinary in front of him. He wanted to sit somewhere that was not a hospital room and not a highway and let the morning settle. His phone was face up on the bar. He had not looked at it since 9 o'clock. At 9:14, it rang. He looked at the screen. The name said Marvella Coates. Before we go any further, drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see where this story is reaching. Anywhere in the world, any time zone. I read every single one. Subscribe and stay with us. Because what you need to understand, before we get to what Gravel said when he picked up, is who Marvella Coates was, and why she was the last person in the world who should have had to call 9 times before someone answered. Marvella Louise Coates, 73 years old, widow, born and raised in Culver and still there, which was a choice she had made and remade every decade and did not regret. Had spent 41 years as the woman other people called. That was not a figure of speech. It was a documented fact, in the way that some things are documented not by records, but by the cumulative weight of remembered occasions. She had sat with dying neighbors through long nights. She had driven people to chemotherapy appointments when their families were too far away or too scared to do it themselves. She had shown up with food after funerals, in a town where showing up with food after funerals was still the done thing, and she had been the person who organized the showing up, the one who called the other women, assigned the dishes, made sure someone brought rolls because someone always forgot the rolls. She had a network of care that she had built by hand over 4 decades, stitch by stitch. The way you build something when you understand that the thing you are building is not a favor, but a floor. Her husband Harold had died 6 years ago after a long illness she had managed with the same organized attention she brought to everything. And after his death, the floor had developed a crack she could not see from the outside. Not a collapse. Not a visible failing, just a settling. The way floors settle, and a cold that came in from below that she had insulated against with habit and routine and the small dignified continuations that she maintained, because Harold had always said a person was the sum of what they kept doing when it was hard to keep doing it. She still made Sunday dinner from scratch, still wrote birthday cards by hand, still had a pot of something on the stove most Tuesdays, which was when her neighbor B used to come over, though B had been less available since her grandchildren had moved closer. She had not asked anyone for much. She had not needed to. Until Wednesday, her hip had been troubling her since December. A specific grinding ache that she had reported to her doctor and been told was arthritis and inflammation, manageable with medication and the recommendation that she be careful on wet surfaces. She had been careful. She had put a mat by the sink. She had moved the cleaning supplies to a lower shelf so she wasn't reaching. She had done everything she was supposed to do. The mat had shifted. She had been reaching for the dish soap. That was all it took. The fall itself had not been dramatic. It had been quick and cold and final, the way falls are when they happen. And she had been on the floor looking at the underside of her kitchen cabinets before her mind had finished processing that she was falling. Her hip screamed. Her wrist, which had caught some of the weight, screamed differently. She had lain still for 2 minutes and assessed herself with the professional calm of a woman who had assessed other people's emergencies for 40 years and was now applying that skill to her own. She could not get up. That was the fact. The rest, the pain, the cold tile, the 2 hours ahead of her, was the circumstance surrounding the fact, and the fact was what required addressing. She called her daughter. And then she called the 8 other people who did not answer. And then, in the silence after the 9th voicemail clicked on, and she had lowered the phone to the tile beside her and looked at the ceiling for a long moment, she had thought about a parking lot in May, and a man who had helped her get her groceries to her car when the cart's wheel had broken and she'd been stranded halfway across the lot with 4 bags and a bad back, and who had done it without making anything of it, had just materialized at her elbow, taken 3 bags, and walked her to her car. And when she'd said thank you, "I didn't catch your name," he had said gravel without any explanation, and she had laughed, and he had laughed, and she had saved the number, because she had the habit of keeping things she might need later. She found the name in her contacts. She pressed call. Miss Coates, his voice was level and immediate, the voice of a man who answered his phone because he believed in answering his phone. "Everything all right?" "I'm on my kitchen floor," she said. "I fell. I can't get up, and I've been here about 2.5 hours. My hip and my wrist, I think the wrist might be broken." She paused. "I'm sorry to call. I called 9 other people first." A silence, brief, the kind that means someone is thinking rather than hesitating. "Are you warm enough?" "No. Is the front door locked?" "Yes, keys under the ceramic frog on the left side of the porch. Harold put it there in 2004 and I've never moved it." "Don't move," he said. "I'm 20 minutes out." "You don't have to, Miss Coates." She stopped. "I'm 20 minutes out," he said again. He hung up. She lay on the cold tile and looked at the ceiling and, for the first time in 2.5 hours, stopped worrying about whether someone was coming. He was there in 17 minutes. She heard the motorcycle pull up, the engine deep and specific, the kind of sound that announces itself, and then silence, and then footsteps on the porch, and then the sound of the ceramic frog being moved with the careful deliberateness of a large man trying not to break something small. The door opened. "Ms. Coates' kitchen," she said. He came around the corner and stopped in the doorway and took in the situation with the same compressed, unhurried assessment he had given the grocery cart in the parking lot, seeing it, cataloging it, already deciding what to do. He crouched down beside her, which put him at her level. He was large enough that crouching still left him substantially above her, but the gesture was what it was. His eyes went to her wrist first, then her hip. The wrist, he said. I know, she said. On a scale. 7, she said. The hip is a 4. The floor is a 2. I'm cold. He took off his jacket, the leather one, the one with the patches, and laid it over her like a blanket without asking. It smelled of road and cold air, and something that was simply the smell of a person who had been outside a long time. I'm going to call an ambulance, he said. I don't need, Miss Coates. She looked at him. He looked back with the expression of a man who had already made the decision and was not going to argue about it, which was not the expression of someone being dismissive, but of someone who had assessed the situation and was not going to let courtesy get in the way of what the situation required. All right, she said. He made the call. He gave her address with the precision of a man who had learned to give addresses clearly: street number, street name, cross street, the descriptor that the dispatcher needed. He stayed on the line until they confirmed the unit. Then he sat on the kitchen floor beside her. She looked at him. You're sitting on my floor, she said. You're on your floor, he said. Seemed like the right place to be. She almost laughed. They were quiet for a moment. The kitchen clock ticked. The cold pressed against the window. Outside, a car went past on the road, slowing slightly as it passed the motorcycle parked in front of the house, then moving on. 9 people, he said. Not accusatory, not with pity. He said it the way you say something you are thinking about. 9, she said. Family? Most of them. He was quiet. I'm sorry, he said. Don't be, she said. You came. He looked at his hands for a moment, large hands scarred across the knuckles in the way of a man who had worked with them for decades. I almost didn't have my phone on, he said. I turned it off at the hospital this morning. I turned it back on in the parking lot when I left. Marvella looked at him. Why did you turn it back on? She asked. He thought about it. Habit, he said. Same reason you called a 10th time instead of stopping at 9. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. I suppose that's right, she said. The ambulance was there in 8 minutes. The paramedics came through the door with the efficiency of people who had done this particular kind of call before. And Gravel stepped back and stayed back, out of the way, present without being in the way, which was its own kind of skill. When they had Marvella on the gurney and moving toward the door, she reached out and touched his arm. Your jacket, she said. He shook his head. Keep it, he said. You can give it back when you're on your feet. She looked at him. You'll have to come get it, she said. I know, he said. The wrist was broken. A clean fracture, the radiologist said. The kind that heals well if it's set and rested, which it was. The hip was severely bruised but intact. The fall had been hard, but not catastrophic, which Marvella understood was a distinction that would matter more and more as she got older, and which she filed in the category of things she would address with appropriate seriousness. She was in the hospital for 2 days. On the first evening, her daughter called from Harrisburg. She had seen the missed call and the voice message and the silence that followed, and had, by some delayed alarm system, understood that something had gone wrong. The conversation was long and not easy, and honest in the way conversations are, when the alternative to honesty has become more costly than honesty itself. Her son called the following morning. He did not explain why he had sent her to voicemail. She did not ask. Some things resolve themselves not by being named, but by both people understanding that they have been named inside, where it counts. Gravel came to the hospital on the second day, not with flowers, with a thermos of good coffee, because he had asked the nurse at the desk what she was allowed to have, and coffee had been on the list. He stayed for 45 minutes. They talked about the town, about Harold, about his brother Denny, who was home and resting and already arguing with his wife about what he could and couldn't eat. which Gravel considered a good sign. When he stood to leave, Marvella said, "I want to ask you something." "Go ahead," he said. "You've been in this town long enough that people know who you are," she said. "And I know what some people say about men who wear what you wear." Gravel waited. "I want to know how many times," she said, "someone has needed help and called you." He thought about it. "I don't keep count," he said. "Estimate," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "More than you'd think," he said. "And how many times did you pick up?" He looked at her. "Every time," he said. He brought 3 men with him when he came to return her jacket. Not as a statement. Not as a display. He had mentioned, in passing, at the chapter meeting the weekend after Marvella came home, that there was a woman in Culver who had been on her kitchen floor for 2.5 hours and had called 9 people who hadn't answered, and that she was home now with a broken wrist and a bruised hip, and a house that probably needed someone to look at it before the next cold snap. He had not asked anyone to come. He had not needed to. 3 men had showed up at his place Saturday morning with tools, and the particular purposeful energy of people who understood that looking at a house and doing nothing was not actually looking at a house. They were there by 10. By noon, the front porch steps had been resecured. 2 of them had been loose in a way that could have been the next fall waiting to happen. The bathroom floor mat had been replaced with one that gripped. The kitchen mat had been replaced and secured at the edges with adhesive strips. The back door weather stripping, which had been failing since the previous winter and which Marvella had been meaning to address, was replaced. Marvella sat at her kitchen table and drank coffee and watched 4 men move through her house with the efficient, unself-conscious competence of people doing something they knew how to do, and she thought about the 9 voicemails sitting on her phone that she had not yet deleted, and the 1 call that had been answered on the first ring. She thought about what it meant that the floor her life had been built on had shown her a crack, and that the crack had been filled by someone she would not have predicted, in a jacket she had kept folded on her armchair for a week because it felt wrong to put it away. When they were done, Gravel stood in her kitchen doorway. "The porch steps," he said, "and the weather stripping. And the mat I saw," she said, "should hold through the winter. If anything else comes up, I have your number," she said. He nodded. "And I have yours," he said. He left without waiting to be thanked, the way a person leaves who understands that gratitude is a real thing and does not need to be performed. The other 3 followed. Their engines started in the driveway, one after another, and then the sound moved down the road and faded into the cold Saturday air. Marvella Coates sat alone in her kitchen in the quiet. She looked at the mat by the sink, flat and secure, going nowhere. She looked at the jacket on the armchair in the next room, which she had decided she was keeping. She picked up her phone. She opened her contacts. Not to call anyone, just to look at the name near the bottom of the list, under a letter it shared with nobody else in her life. Gravel. She had saved it 8 months ago in a parking lot, because a man had carried her groceries without making it into anything, and because she had learned, over 73 years of building floors for other people, that the ones worth keeping were the ones who didn't need a reason to show up. She put the phone down. She went to make Sunday dinner. From scratch, the way she always had. Because Harold had been right about that, and about most things, and the kitchen was warm, and the mat held, and she was still here. If this story reached you, if you believe that the ones who actually show up deserve more credit than the ones who only say they will, share this with someone who needs to hear that today. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment. Has someone ever surprised you by showing up when you needed them most? Type answered in the comments if this one stayed with you.